Middle-aged men and other relationships. Hi, clear any the unemployable counselor is very much employable. I brought you a video, two of them last week actually. It was about 30 minutes altogether. The first one was kind of a combination of ideas and formulations and theories. The second one was, dare I say it, Emmy worthy. Okay, and what we talked about was males of a certain age and friendship. And by certain age, I'm talking about people middle-aged, maybe closing in on retirement, right? And the relationships that we have and how hard it is to maintain friends and why that is, right? So we talked about links. If you haven't already, I'll put a link to that video. Give it a watch. Because this one is we're going to talk about some similar themes, but we're going to look at it from a different perspective. And I even wrote a couple of things down because I am of a certain age. I want to be sure I get my points in. But I'm looking at middle-aged men of a certain age, as I like to put it, and other relationships. I was thinking, but what other relationships, right? Well, I'm going to tell you. Because it's not just friendship. Friendship is something that a lot of guys have trouble acquiring as they get older, or maintaining, or even just having in general, for a variety of different reasons. But I started thinking about it after the last post about, okay, well, is that it? It kind of seems like I left things kind of, half full, or, I kind of felt empty-handed about it, even though, like I said, it was Emmy worthy, right? But what I'm saying is, when it comes to other relationships, I'm talking about marriage, right? I'm talking about work friends, I'm talking about maybe even the difference between friends and acquaintances, right? Is everyone who's an acquaintance a friend? Is everyone who's your friend an acquaintance? No, I think those are two different things there, right? And we're going to go into that in a little more detail. But first, let's talk about the big ones, like marriage, right? And I don't, and that's not in a bad way at all. When I'm talking about marriage and friendship, is a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this as well, we get married, you're invested in our partner, that's our best friend, that's the person who we gravitate towards, do everything with. Sometimes it's tough to break out of that cycle and, see other people, because we might feel like we need to be included with that, or they need to be included, right? And we even talk about the dreaded, what happens when your partner has a friend who has a partner, right? And then it's almost like a forced kind of friendship where you need to get along with this guy because your partner is friends with the other one, right? And it starts early. But we're going to start with us growing up. And I want you to think back, because a lot of times, especially now, when there's more single parents nowadays than there was back then, a lot of times, for example, if your mother is friends with someone and they have a child around the same age, it's just automatically expected you guys are going to be friends, even if you don't like each other. So you're kind of putting you're putting their needs above your own by associating with this other person that you may or may not like. I think we can all remember back to, situations where we were kind of put together with another person of a similar age and expected to get along. Does it always work out? No. Was it always fun? No. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't, right? And those are the moments where it gets ingrained in us early that our friendship is interchangeable, right? If you agree or disagree with what I'm going to say and what I'm talking about, put it in the comments. You can get a good discussion going. But I'm looking at it from the aspect of, even at a young age, we're kind of taught that our friendship almost has conditions on it. It's like, if you're there, it's expected. But if you don't click and you don't meet, that can sour that whole thing. So then meeting new people, it's like, I don't really want to do this, right? Now I'm taking I'm looking in the Wayback Machine now, and I'm checking that out, because even at a young age we do that. Now transfer that to when we get older, we go to school, go to high school, right? We might have different circles, we might have one or two friends we know back then that we still have contact with now. But I find that whole view of friendship, like I said, kind of gets incorporated at an early age, right? If your dad or your other parent, they weren't sociable, well then probably you're not going to be overly sociable because you grew up in that environment, not having those opportunities to do that. And here we are. Okay. That was a lot in the first 5 minutes, hey? But there's more. What we're going to have a look now is that young man or woman, well, young man in this case, right, as we're talking about men of a certain age now. So let's go back 30 years and you're in high school. You meet the people that, you're friends with during those formative teenage years, good or bad, right? Wrong crowd, good crowd, doesn't matter. It's the connections we make and how we sustain those over time, which is what leads to, I think, us feeling fulfilled in that aspect or not. Okay? So you're in high school, you have a group of friends, you meet someone who's you're attracted to. You want them to be more than a friend. There's, maybe you end up dating someone and then it changes. If they don't necessarily like the friends you have, you're willing to let those friends go in order to, get some makeout time, right? It's it's a trade-off, I think, that everyone gladly makes at certain times in their life where they value some things more than others. And when you're that age and it's about experiences and learning and kind of growing into who you're going to be, that stuff kind of fits because that's all part of that learning experience and curve, right? Yeah. So let's say you're in that, and then we're going to flash forward ahead, get married, right? You might invite some of those people that you hung out with when you're younger, but your wife, your partner, your person is the number one priority. That is who your best friend is. That is kind of everything. And that takes precedence until you have kids over that, extracurricular outside activity. Because like I said, if by some chance your partner and them don't get along, you're probably going to pick your partner over that, right? And I've been I shouldn't say victim, but I've definitely partaked in that as well. Because as I said in one of the other videos I mentioned earlier, once I got married, it's like a new page. Everything was gone. This is my life now. And I think, the error of my ways, but I honestly just didn't know any better because I thought that was the way things were supposed to go. And a lot of that, I think, is how kind of our upbringing and how we view friendships. Because I tell you, I know, like, growing up, I know, like, my dad had a couple of good friends from when he was a kid, or as he put in his rangy-tangy days, but they didn't see each other very often. But when they did, it's like they picked up or they never left off, and it could be years. And I think that's a common thread, as we discussed last time, about friendships with males and how they kind of connect, right? So, I mean, we got that marriage piece where all of a sudden our social circle is our partner in that circle, okay? And a lot of times I find it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to invite my friend over, he's going to bring his wife, you guys are going to get along. It was always, no, my friend's coming over, she has a husband, right, and we're going to go. And some of those things lead to really awful situations because you're kind of paired with someone who might not necessarily might not necessarily have any thoughts about either way, but you're kind of forced into a social environment. So it's either you have to play nice because your partner is invested in that friendship and you are a secondary aspect of what, their friendship is, if that makes sense. Okay. So makes it difficult, right? I've been in that situation where it's like, this guy's an idiot, or, or not even that, but it's just like, or it's like, you know what, we don't have a lot in common here because I love my partner, I'm going to try with this. So we put ourselves out there again for someone else's need. And it goes back to like if you're a kid and that stuff happened, you had to play with, a kid that you don't necessarily get along with or like, or maybe they don't like you. It's not just about you, right? How do you approach that? And staying when it's right, you can say, look, I'm not going out with that guy ever again. It's like, well, it's important to me. It's relationship important to me. Okay. So you have to compromise some things. But then what happens if that marriage ends? Right? I did a good job of avoiding one for a few years until by happenstance it just, occurred. And then, you're kind of stuck with this dynamic now where it's like, okay, all right, I'm going to accept the fact this is kind of how things are. And then they might turn out to not be very nice people either. Right? And all because, right, you went out and kind of said, okay, we're going to do this piece. I'm going to be with you, right? I want her to be happy, so we're going to do this. And then it leads, it's like one domino knocks over another. And once things start to flow in a negative direction, it's hard to get that back, especially with friends. You can kind of understand why people end up like they are or go through whatever it is they're going through or have severe health issues because, right, they're coming at it from an angle you can't understand, except now, looking back on it, it's like, why did I even allow myself to be in that situation? Because that's the real crux here. We have the key to all the locks that we put on the doors. We just don't even know it, right? So when you have situations like that, it makes it difficult, but it also reinforces our thought process around what friendship kind of means and how some things are interchangeable. And it ties in with work, right? It's like you go to work, you have people there that you're friends with, right? You have work friends. It's not necessarily people you're going to go out with, right? It's not necessarily people where if I had a flat tire, you're going to call and say, hey, could you give me a hand? Or they're going to call you and say, I need to bury this body. Well, you don't want those kind of calls anyway, but knowing that someone out there would help you, it's honestly kind of a cool feeling, to be honest, right? So, I mean, I think that as that unfolds, you kind of see where what you value is a true friend and what you value isn't. I consider work friends more like close acquaintances, right? I did talk about the difference between friends and acquaintances. A friend, this is my own opinion now, but a friend is someone that you could be like, hey, let's go watch wrestling, or hey, let's go shoot around a golf, or let's go for a coffee, or let's go talk about the stupidest shit imaginable, right? And laugh about it because it's silly and that's kind of what guys do, right? But there's people that you wouldn't share some of that stuff with because you keep them at an arm's length. And that's where I think with work friends, it can start off where they're either people are gung-ho to be your friend, but then sometimes in the work environment, Mano doesn't like this part, but sometimes in the work environment, it goes with what they want. And what they want might not be your friendship, but it might be what you have. And you can leave yourself open to get exposed and to get victimized or hurt because of stuff like that, because of other people. So the goal is to how can you open yourself up and get more friends and cultivate relationships without leaving yourself open to being, potentially victimized by some nefarious plot that you're not privy to, right? And the short answer is you can't. Anytime you put yourself out there, you take chances, whether it's, talking to new people, doing weird stuff online like myself, right? Or any other type of environment, right? You have to, no risk, no reward, right? Fortune favors the bold, is what I like to say. Okay? In situations like that, you kind of have to put yourself out there. But if you put yourself out there in a positive way with a little bit of integrity, I like to think you attract that in return. So, I mean, just because you're stuck or you've been in these situations where you've had friends that didn't turn out to be friends at all, that, you were still open to allowing that to happen. And I think that's a positive thing. But you got to learn the lessons that come with that. If you don't, then there's no point. Then you might as well just, line up and let them come and give you a smack because that's all that is, right? And I was thinking about life changes, right? So let's say you're married and you're divorced, right? Things change because especially when you divorce, whatever friends you had as a couple, you don't necessarily have anymore now that you're not a couple, right? I found that people usually take sides in any sort of relationship ending like that, right? There's always someone who's gonna, think you're either the hero or you're the victim, right? It doesn't really matter. All you got to do is just kind of act a little bit of integrity, and I think you can go through that. But people are always going to have an opinion no matter what, especially if they're friends with someone who you're not with anymore, right? They're not going to take your side, even if it's blatantly obvious that you know what I mean. It might not necessarily have been all your fault, right? You still have to have that dynamic. You still have to be able to accept the fact that that's how it is and learn from it and move on. Okay? There's no point trying to be someone's friend who doesn't want to be your friend, who's already made it perfectly clear where they fall in the grand scheme of things, right? You have to be able to let that stuff go, because if you carry it on, it's just going to eat you up and nobody else, right? It boils back to self-care and to know what you're worth, and more importantly, what you don't want. And that's kind of happens. So you have these big life changes like marriage or death, right? Retirement, right? Maybe birth of a child, right? All those sorts of things kind of compound to put more of an emphasis on the social aspects of your relationship. So you have to be able to look at it through a lens of, okay, this didn't work. These avenues are probably not for me anymore. I need to look at what avenues are in front of me and where I can go from there, as opposed to trying to rebuild a house that someone keeps trying to blow up, right? Or blowing up, right? You can't keep doing that. You got to move on and do what's best. And a lot of times with friends, you have to really, like the old prospector down at the river, you really got to sift through to get the parts out of it that you want to get out of it, right? Because, man, friendship's hard. Like, it is. And as you get older, making friends, it's kind of tough, because how do you do that? There's like, there's like the coffee row where you'll go to like different restaurants, and there's always a bunch, there's a bunch of men of a much older age kind of sitting around having coffee, reminiscing, right? They don't go out, shoot pool, they don't go do whatever, but that's the social circle. They show up, and whoever's there is part of that table, and they have a conversation, and they have that camaraderie, and they go about their day, but they always have that almost on a daily basis. They go there and do those things, right? So it's crazy, man. Casual encounters is what I consider like your spouse's friends, people that you might not hang out with if you had any other alternative. But because you love the person you're with, you're going to go through that and take the time to play that game with them, right? And it means a lot to them, and it might, give you extra kisses or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, you still have to develop friends for yourself. Because you put all your stock in someone else in their group, if something happens and that's done, you're not going to have access to that anymore. And then you're even more isolated, you feel even more alone because of those actions and where it is, right? And I feel like this is deep. I don't know. But there's lots of things, like why are things like they are? And I'm going to go right back to the beginning. I think a lot of it is just things that we've learned that we accept as just, okay, this is what I need to do here. This is how this operates, okay? I'll go because I'm with this person, I go and do that. Because I'm at work, it's a smaller pool, you kind of gravitate towards people that are kind of similar, but not always because of that small pool. Or maybe it's just a matter of positions where, oh yeah, there's two people doing this and this kind of role. So, you know what? You're kind of stuck with who brought you to the dance kind of thing. But I mean, like, how do you get out of that? How do you look at things and increase the circle? Now I'm going to talk about myself now, because I've always considered myself much of a, introvert, not me so much of an extrovert, which is weird considering I have a YouTube channel. But it goes back to, like I said earlier, about putting yourself out there, and that's what I did. And a lot of positive things that have occurred in my life the last year, coming up in October, has been a result of doing things like this, right? And as a result of that, I've met more people. And out of those people, I got a few people where it's like, I consider this guy a friend. I'll go for coffee with him, that kind of stuff, right? And reconnecting with old friendships and relationships as well. You have to be open to that. Sometimes things happen in happenstance. Last video, I talked about a friend of mine I hadn't talked to, hadn't seen him in 20 years. And then through an online community kind of thing, we just reconnected, and it's been gangbusters, right? And it's been a lot of fun. I enjoy the silliness of it all, right? But the type of friend who it's like you can go, man, you're a dick, and they're not want to fight you because you're just joking because you're just friends. That kind of stuff. And I think it goes back to more how men handle relationships, I think, than women, or however people like to identify these days. But I'm not saying that women are different, but they look at, I think, different things, and they can have more interchangeable parts, while men are more, it's like, oh no, I'm with this, I'm doing this this is a world, and when that stops, it's kind of like, oh, where do we go from here, right? Those pieces. And I think that what makes it hard is that because then when people retire, there's a gap, especially for men. And I know work eats up a lot of that narrative, right, in your life, and I know me too. Like as I get older, I think, man, at some point, maybe I might retire, right, in the future. But what's going to happen then? You hear so many stories of people, then it's like, oh, people retire and then you got sick, right? And then it's like, there's not rhyme or reason, and there's not a lot of, I'll just say it, there's not a lot of fairness to it all, right? Because you're trying to deal with stuff at a level where you start to finally look at yourself, and then after putting all that time into, your kids, your job, all that stuff, it's like at the end of the road, it's just the end of the road. And how do you avoid that? Because the best part about life is the journey. And part of the journey is having new experiences and being open to that. Because I'm at the age now where it's like, I like the idea of coming home and not leaving, right? I have to kind of force myself out of the house, or I got to force myself out to do things. Even when it's something that I think would be very fun and pleasurable, it's still tough to leave the house sometimes to do it, right? Content here with my dog, just hanging out, right? And then it's like, is that a solitary life, or does that just show as you get older, maybe you become more content with certain things and just like things to play out like they do? I don't know the answer to that. I know that, I talked to a friend of mine who lives 2 doors down, and he was like, I just said to my partner, um, yeah, Corey lives 2 doors away from me, and it's like, man, we never see each other, but we'll text every day, right? Or wave at each other, or every once in a while I'll catch him looking in my bedroom windows. Okay, no, not really. But those sorts of things happen. And it's because I think of just the nature, our nature. And I think a lot of it is like, it's usually nature versus nurture. But I think our nature came this way because of how we were nurtured and how we viewed those relationships as a kid, right? It's like when you go to school, you're in a class with like 25 kids. Out of those 25, right? You're kind of, oh, you got to make friends. What if you don't get along with those kids? What if you get along with another class? Okay, then you hang out with them at recess and stuff like that. But through school, you're with that group, right? And as you get older with high school, I love the idea of interchangeable because then you see new kids, new class, opens up the more kind of people to know, experiences, more of a chance to make a connection, some real friends, right? It's crazy because I look at, I just think back to like all the people that I met, the people that I consider close friends. And I mean, a lot. It ended when I got married, got a job, or my circumstances, I had life changes that changed, right? Maybe I went back to school, got an education, got a job, right? And things kind of shift that way. Good. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that sometimes, is it Occam's razor? Sometimes the simplest answer is what it is, right? Maybe it's just the view that man has to be this solitary, stoic, you know, got everything together, can fix everything going on, right? And the rest of everyone is down there, right? We're out fighting the wars, and oh look, you know, oh look, everyone else is here, the children and the women folk, right? Whatever you want to put that. I don't mean that the arbitrary. I mean that looking through history, that's been traditionally the view. So I think now they're looking at a spot like where there's more to it than just this is my role. How do you expand that? I used to think men and women couldn't be friends. And I'll be honest with you, I still kind of feel that to a certain extent because I think I always thought at some point um, something else might come up there, right? And I don't know. And I think, and I'm starting to think maybe that's an archaic thought process. Life isn't that simple. But at the same time, you got to be open to those kind of things where it's a new world now, right? It's interesting. I am a firm believer you can't be friends with your ex. Anyone who says they can is lying to you, right? Because that's a really tough wicket. Even if you have a kid together and there's an ex, there's still that, you can be cordial and work with for the kid's best interest. But as for any type of friendship or friendly behavior, I don't think you can have that. Not that it's just like, but I mean, like, why would you want to? Is kind of my point. Especially if I'm all for forgiving and forgetting. Well, maybe a little of each. But at the same time, when you're looking at what you want out of life, you have to have those new experiences and be able to break new ground in order to get where you want to get. Okay. Holy. For me, it was a fast 26 minutes. For you, it probably felt like 2 hours and 26 minutes. So if you made it this far and you're still awake, I want to thank you for watching. And if you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe to The Unemployable Counselor on YouTube. I'm on Facebook. I'm on TikTok. This weekend, I'm hoping to be on something else. But we'll see how that goes. Anyways, I want to thank you for watching. And if you have any comments, put them down. Let's talk about this. Give me your thoughts. How do you think that friendship dynamic works? Because I really like to hear it, and I think other people would too. And remember, you're not alone. I'll be your friend. Take care, and we'll see you on the channel.